Yeah, you're playing with fire here. Be careful what you wish for, I guess, is an old admonition, but it applies heavily to AI. Can it produce amazing results? Yes. And it already has, and there's no question about that. Can it produce disasters? Hijacking or destroying critical infrastructure, starting a war?
Mm.
Yes, that's possible too.
Hi, everybody. It's Sean Ring, editor of The Root Awakening, and today I'm going to be talking to Jim Rickards, the one and only, about the huge topic of AI. And everyone's talking about it, really. What are the opportunities, and more importantly, what are the limits or potential dangers of this new technology? And Jim, I'd love for you to kick us off by having you explain what's the difference between AI and ChatGPT and all the different definitions, jargon we're suddenly getting hurled at us.
Sure, that's a great question, Sean. We'll go into it, and when we're done, we'll know more about it than most of the people on Wall Street because you're right. Wall Street loves buzzwords. They love narratives. AI, of course, is artificial intelligence. GPT is generative pre-trained transformers. I don't have to get the weeds on what that means. I mean, what it actually means is generative means it has output. It can give you pictures and words and text. And pre-trained means it's spent like the last couple of years reading 9 billion internet pages with iterative functions, trying to learn how to speak the English language in effect. And transformer technology just means it can parallel process. So instead of doing things sequentially, it can parallel process, meaning do multiple things at once, and then kind of converge the results to get the output. So that's a quick definition of GPT. GPT is just a form of artificial intelligence. It's not a whole separate world. It kind of took the world by storm, about 6, 8 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, when they introduced GPT-4 as an app. And you can put it on your iPhone or obviously your desktop. And I think it had 100 million downloads. In other words, 100 million users within something like 30 days, like really fast, faster than Facebook, Google, Gmail, Twitter, all these other applications. There was nothing like it. Everyone was like amazed with the results. College kids were like, I don't have to write essays anymore. I'm not sure they still do anyway, but if you don't want to do it, GPT will do it for you. So GPT is a particular kind of artificial intelligence, but what sets it apart is the output. It's not just giving you a probability or a numeric way of thinking about outcomes. It actually will, as I say, talk to you. So and by the way, GPT, yeah, headline news like 6, 8 months ago, but not entirely new either. Think about what Alexa and Siri are. Alexa will talk to you. Siri will talk to you. I always turn them off, but I once got an Alexa in the mail by accident. I do a lot of shopping on Amazon, I guess, like everybody, and they had some promotion, and I guess I clicked too fast, but the promotion was, if you buy this, we'll give you a free Alexa. Of course, it's not really free. They want you to hook it up and like be a slave to Amazon for the rest of your life. So when I opened it, I said, oh man, it's one of these Alexa things. And I actually have a sledgehammer. I use it. I'm not averse to manual labor. And I went out in the driveway and I took the sledgehammer and I destroyed it because I didn't want any part of it. But they're popular. I mean, I've been in homes that have them. And like, hey, Alexa, makes me a drink, So, but my point is, Alexa and Siri have been around. They talk to you. They respond to you. They do stuff. Maybe just turn on the lights or turn off the lights. They're not quite to the a bartending stage yet, but that's generative. That's output. I mean, it'll like you say, it'll talk to you. So that's a kind of GPT. What we're seeing now is a lot more advanced. So lots and lots of buzz. But and then of course artificial intelligence is behind it all. But I want to make a couple points. First of all, GPT, is it clever? Is it kind of sexy in the sense it's new and everybody wants a little piece of it? Yeah, but it's not that big a deal. I call it a speed reading plagiarist. I mean, it can read the internet faster than anybody, and you can actually buy the internet. By the way, I learned this recently. There are services out there. They're not cheap, but you can buy the whole internet. Like, I don't know how many billion pages they have, but somebody saved it, and you can buy it, and then you can turn your application loose on those, I'll say, billions of pages. I don't know the exact number, and it just reads and reads and reads and reads and reads. At obviously very high speed. And one of the interesting things about GPT in particular, but also AI applications where they're going, we'll talk a little bit about the future of AI, is how much processing power you need. It was why all of a sudden are we hearing about this? I had my first like serious technical conversation about AI in 1979. I was talking to a partner at AD Little, which was a big consulting firm at the time, and he was a specialist in this. And he told me a little bit about it. I'm not, raising my hand saying I was an expert, 45 years ago, but we did have that conversation. My point being, AI in various forms has been around since the 1950s. Really, the first kind of breakthroughs were Alan Turing. Now, Alan Turing's famous for a lot of other stuff, including the cracking the German codes, the Omega machine in World War II, and kind of co-invented one of the first computers. But in the 50s, he wrote some very influential papers about artificial intelligence, very forward-looking. It kicked around the 60s. There was some development. I mentioned again a conversation I had in 1979, but they didn't make much headway. There was like, can we really do this, or can it do what we wanted to do? And they weren't getting very far. But the reason wasn't because there was a shortage of mathematicians or a shortage of developers or that people were dumber. I mean, none of those things were true. What was true is they didn't have the processing power. And so one of the reasons that there's been this AI explosion over the past year, the GPT explosion more recently, is not that the engineering techniques are completely new. They're not. Some of them are, but most of them are not. What is new is the processing power, in particular these NVIDIA processors, which were invented for gamers. I mean, they were, I'm not a gamer, I know people who are, but I do know that requires to get the realistic graphics and the multiple scenarios and the war games and multiple participants and all the things that gamers are into, you need enormous processing power. And NVIDIA was smart enough to come up with a chip that could do it. And then somebody said, hey, wait a second, maybe we could use that over here in the world of GPT. And sure enough, you couldn't. Of course, NVIDIA has gone to the stock price has gone to the moon. But that faster machines, faster processors, larger, I'll say data farms or cloud facilities where you actually can host the entire internet. So think about how much processing power that takes. And then think about how much processing power the large language models take to actually troll through all that stuff and kind of read it, make sense of it, do all these correlations, eliminate certain things that, you and I would not consider grammatical, et cetera, and then produce results. That it kind of boggles the mind, but that's fairly recent. So all of a sudden, the processing power, the storage power, the data farms, and the cloud all caught up to what was kind of waiting in the wings, which was the math and the engineering. And now the developers went crazy and said, oh, we can actually take these ideas that have been kicking around for decades and implement them, because you could never do it before. One of the, if you're really down in the weeds in terms of stock prices and where GPT is going and so forth, one of the constraints is actually kind of electricity. I mean, imagine how much it's like you think EVs are a problem. I mean, try running the kind of machines that we're talking about. So they're almost, they meaning the engineers who do this, are almost at the outer limit of what you can do today, even with the breakthroughs in processing power and NVIDIA processors, and AMD has something coming online, and data farms, all that stuff I mentioned. Even with that progress, we're kind of pushing boundaries in terms of where you can go with it. That doesn't mean that you can't backfill a zillion applications, but we might be kind of hitting some speed bumps in terms of where you can go in the future. Theoretically, the future has already been outlined in something called AGI, artificial general intelligence. So we're not in the age of AGI yet, but we're getting closer, and experts disagree. Is it 5 years away, 10 years away, 30 years away, ever? No one really knows, but they're working towards it. But artificial general intelligence, this would be a machine that was even more not even human-like, because at some point that analogy breaks down. This would be way beyond human capabilities. It's not just a machine that can figure out something faster and better than a human or find some correlation that would be difficult for a human to spot. We're already at that stage. We're talking about something where the machines are, cooking up plans to take over the world. We don't even know it, and we won't know it until we're kind of trapped in it. And that's where you get some of these nightmare scenarios. Are they taking over the world? We can leave that debate for another presentation. Let's talk about kind of what's here and now. So AI in the 1980s went through what was called the AI winter. And what that means is that the theory was ahead of the capability. So you couldn't really implement it. And it wasn't where they wanted it to be. You couldn't go further because of the processing constraints. And it was kind of on the shelf, like, yeah, interesting, but let's do something else. That began to change in the late 90s, partly with the invention of the internet. If you're trying to train an algorithm on a large volume of materials, you need a large volume of materials. And a couple of newspaper clippings weren't going to be enough. Well, it wasn't the internet as we know it today, didn't really kind of explode on the scene until 1996. And even then, the take-up was slow. I remember in the late 90s, this is a good example of what Marshall McLuhan calls imposing the new content on old forms, because we haven't figured out what the new forms should be. But somebody actually who I guess been around in the age of phone books and yellow pages came up with an internet directory. And it was like the yellow pages for the internet. It was like, here's a book, and it's got every website in the world right here in this book, and you can look it up by category, whatever. And maybe there were, several 100,000 entries. I don't know, but you can look up Sam Goody or something like that. But it just obviously blew. You couldn't. There's no such thing today. What you have is a search engine, your portal, Google or something like that. And, kind of using algorithms to maybe find the link you're looking for, or maybe not. But that was that's an example of how fast that came into a short period of time. People forget, Twitter didn't launch until 2006. I think Facebook, today it's Meta, that didn't really, that was like a college boutique kind of thing with 6 or 7 universities, even in the early 2000s. And then that didn't break through until around 2004. So, okay, it was 20 years ago, but that's all fairly new. But that's what you need. You need that stuff. You need Facebook, Google, a billion other websites, and access to all those pages in order to train AI to do the most advanced stuff that it's doing today. So all of a sudden, a number of things converge: processing power, storage, cloud, and the internet itself. In terms of the volume, I'll just use the word pages, a material, because you need all those pages, because computers actually are dumb. They do what you tell them to do. They produce amazing results. But if you're going to train a model to produce essays or books for that matter, it needs a lot of so-called training materials. That's what they call them, training materials. And that hasn't existed until recently. Anyway, all those things have come together. And now here's AI. Now, another point I want to make is that I said AI is not new. I traced it back to the 50s and, the 80s and 90s and all that. It's already here. It's not coming. It's like, oh, gee, when's AI going to get here? No, if you open your refrigerator and there's a little warning sign saying time to change the water filter. I never do, by the way, but time to change the water filter. That's artificial intelligence. Somebody wrote a code that said, okay, how long has it been since this guy changed his water filter? What's the recommended change date? What's the calendar? And how do I know what day it is? And all figure all that stuff out, and then tell me every time I grab a glass of wine, change the water filter. I just got a new car. My old car which I loved, was 15 years old. I got it in 2008, had 250,000 miles on it. But my family was harassing me into getting a new one, so I did. So anyway, all the wonderful things that were not around in 2008 are on my dashboard. But fortunately, I like Audis. I've been driving Audi since the early 1980s. But fortunately, the Audi engineers let you disable all this stuff. So it's just in your face. There's like a pop-up thing where there's like the speed limit and the actual speed are on the dashboard, not the dashboard, on the windshield. There's like a pop-up thing on the windshield, like a jet fighter pilot type of thing. I didn't mind the speedometer. Like, okay, I got to check that, but I didn't need anyone to tell me what the speed limit is because I rarely do the speed limit. But then they had another one. It was like a green. It was a green arrow with a green foot, and it was like this. And like I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up in the owner's manual. Like, what is that? And it's like it's telling you to slow down. I was like, I don't need. My wife has been doing that for 50 years. I don't need. I don't need another. I don't need a machine to tell me to slow down. She does that without any prompting. But fortunately, I could go in and disable all those things. I just had to find them and find the menus and turn them all off because I know how to drive. But my point is, that's all artificial intelligence. I'm not really here to do an automotive lecture. I'm just saying that and many, many, many other examples we all encounter every day, including Siri and Alexa, pops on your computer, and it's all artificial intelligence. There's nothing new about this. So if you say, well, what is new? And it is these LLMs, large language models, the fact that we can actually not just create artificial intelligence that does what we tell it to do, we can create artificial intelligence that will go out on its own and learn. I'll put the word learn in quotation marks, but learning would be the AI program produces something and it's flawed in some way. There's a mistake. But if you kind of either tell it it's a mistake, or it figures out on its own, gee, I think I made a mistake, it'll go back and teach itself not to avoid that particular mistake. And the next time it produces some output, in theory, that mistake will not be there. So it gets smarter as it goes along. Again, I'm anthropomorphizing this, which is one of the dangers. But when I say learning smarter, those are all human attributes. Some animals are capable of that to some extent, but that's kind of what the machine is doing, and that is new. That's self-learning, self-training, and plus, again, the size of the training set. So you're not limited to reading. Even the Encyclopedia Britannica would be a lot. That times, 1,000 to the 1,000th power is kind of what we're talking about. So, can it do? I guess kind of just to bring it back to the stock market, Sean, because I know that's what a lot of our listeners and readers are interested in. Can we justify the stock market hype based on what I'm describing? And what I'm describing is pretty much, up to date. I mean, just personally, I've worked on neural networks since the early 2000s. As I mentioned, I had discussions about this in the 70s and 80s, but I actually built, with others. I was a co-inventor, co-developer of an artificial intelligence neural network for the CIA in the early 2000s, designed to spot trading patterns in stock markets that could be indicative of terrorist attacks. And at the time, there was definitely insider trading ahead of 9/11. There's no question about that. I led the project that investigated that for the CIA. The evidence was clear. I had the guy, one of the best stock traders of the second half of the 20th century, who was the specialist in American Airlines and United Airlines on the New York Stock Exchange. So his firm, I mean, he had his people down there, but he ran that. He was the specialist in those stocks. Though, of course, those are the two airlines that were hijacked. And he said, I recruited him to come down to CIA headquarters. The only thing he said, can I land my helicopter there? I said, no, John, the president doesn't get to go by helicopter. He goes by car. So you can fly into the National Airport. We'll pick you up. But he said he's never seen a more blatant case of insider trading in his life. And this is the guy, this guy invented block trading at Merrill Lynch in the 1970s and was one of the leading risk arbitrageurs through the 80s and 90s, and multi-billionaire. John Mulhern passed away a few years ago, but so we had tons of evidence. The 9/11 Commission kind of covered it up. They mentioned it in a footnote And then they excused it like, yeah, maybe, but it happens all the time. And so how can you draw the connection? It's like, no, the guy's cousin was in Mecca and he stopped off on his way to New York. I mean, we had all that intelligence. So, but the CIA is not a criminal enforcement agency. They're an intelligence agency. They're supposed to figure out what happens next, leave the investigation to the FBI and the SEC and all that. So we were, our team was building a system that would monitor stock market and bond market, commodities, other market activity, looking for anomalous patterns that could be indicative of a coming terrorist attack. So we actually had, we got in trouble with the general counsel because we found a lot of like sleazy insider trading. It wasn't terrorist related. It was just typical scummy Wall Street insider trading, garden variety. And we were giving referrals to the SEC. We're like, here, you guys deal with this. And they said, no, you can't do that. We're not a law enforcement agency. We don't do that. So we started what we call the catch and release program, where we would find the sleazeballs and not do anything about it because that wasn't our job. But we were looking for terrorists. We actually had one bright red signal on American Airlines 3 days before they broke up the liquid bomb attack in 2006. So that was August 2006. I remember we had the signal, we elevated it at that time. It kind of got flipped over to the Department of Homeland Security. And then like I'm a bit of a night. I was working at 2 a.m. and I had CNN on muted and I was writing and breaking news, MI5 and New Scotland Yard arrest terrorists in East London and all this stuff. And it was about blowing up American Airlines in midair. That was the liquid bomb plot. So we did spot that 2 days ago. But my point is, that was artificial intelligence. We were using Bayes' theorem. We were using correlations and other statistical techniques. But it was all a form of artificial intelligence because we had a machine that was telling us what was going to happen, or at least giving us bright red signals, if you will. I lectured on this at complexity theory at the Applied Physics Laboratory, top secret weapons lab, and space exploration lab halfway between Washington and Baltimore. I lectured on this at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in 2009. Actually, it was an event on complexity theory hosted by Los Alamos, but then a group of us, you had to high security clearances. We were able to go 40 miles out in the desert. We actually went into the Los Alamos laboratory, it's a city. I mean, you see the like movies like Oppenheimer, they show what it was like in 1943. It was just wooden shacks and ramshackle. They put it together quickly. They had all the big brains. Today, it's more like a city, and the streets have names from all the nuclear testing sites. There's like Bimini Avenue, Christmas Island Boulevard, so okay, it really evokes the Cold War and the nuclear age and all that. But when I was there, I can't say much about what we did, but we were looking at how because you're not allowed to set up nuclear weapons these days because of the nuclear test ban treaty. Well, how do you improve your weapons? Well, the answer is you do simulations, and questions how you do that, et cetera. So we were doing simulated nuclear weapons explosion to test new weapons without actually blowing them up. And but it was the point is the matrix was an AI cascade. I mean, you can do them vertically. A lot of times they're done from left to right, vertically on the page, but you can also do them top to bottom, where the top row are input nodes that produce certain outputs, and then those outputs produce inputs. And at each level, the mathematical processing gets more complex, and you kind of boil it all down to a certain result, usually expressed probabilistically. But that was in 2009. I mean, so my point is I have a long history of doing this at an expert level. I'm very familiar with it, but we are kind of at a new stage now. Having said that, it is a big deal. I'm not downplaying it. There are already examples where AI has come up with certain genetic cures for certain kinds of cancer. Well, that's a big deal. But it was able to do it by studying, I don't know, thousands, 100,000 molecules and find correlations between the molecules and what they produce that a human would never find. Not technically impossible, but how many centuries of kind of manual processing or even computer processing would it take to do that, and the AI was able to do it very quickly because they can look for these kinds of correlations and sort through them. It's like winning at chess, like beating Garry Kasparov at chess, but exponentially more complex than that. So there are real, it is going to lead to some breakthroughs in the pharmaceutical industry, biochemicals, physics, other hard sciences. So I don't dispute that. But there are limits and there's a lot of downside. And let's kind of go through a couple of those before we run right out and buy the latest AI. Because what Wall Street's doing now, is what Wall Street always does. Like it's a narrative. It's like, hey, call it AI and push it out the door. By the way, this guy, Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, he looks more and more, let me just say less impressive. I don't want to say anything disparaging or negative, just less impressive. I'm actually more impressed with what I'm learning about the board that fired him. Then they all had to resign. But the board that fired him were like, you're moving pretty fast here, and we're concerned about safety. And by the way, this debate very closely resembles what was happening. If you go back to the movie Oppenheimer and what happened with the Manhattan Project and warnings that were being issued, and there were certain scientists like, Edward Teller, like full speed ahead, and he was kind of the father of the thermonuclear device, not the atomic bomb, but the hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer did what he did. He did what he was asked to do. There's probably nobody better at that. But there were a lot of people at the time who were like, are we doing the right thing here? Are we opening doors? Is this where we really want to go, et cetera? I mean, we know what happened, but there was a pretty healthy debate at the time. Well, that same debate is going on in the AI world right now. And I don't think the metaphor is stretched, because if you screw this up, if you create AI applications that are actually smarter and faster than humans can keep up with, and if they're self-learning and like self-taught, and they just kind of get smarter, again, I'll put that in quotation marks, and take over some system, some critical infrastructure system. They've done experiments where they say, okay, AI, we want you to come up with a plan to save the planet, because we're those phony climate alarm stuff. And by the way, that's a whole other subject I don't know if we have time for, which is all the fact that these applications and the output will only be as smart as the people creating them. Well, do they believe in false science, such as climate alarm? I talked to the smartest guy in the field. I'm writing a book about this. I'm doing a lot of research, but a guy who is best described, he has 1 foot in the CIA and 1 foot in Silicon Valley. There's literally nobody who bridges that gap better than this guy I talked to. When we were talking about, bias and what you do about it. But just getting back to kind of AI taking over, yeah, you're playing with fire here, because if the AI teaches itself and moves beyond what the engineers designed, and the engineers miss something, which they always do. So this one program, they said, make the world a better place. And it said, well, let's kill all the humans, because humans are, producing CO2. There's no harm in CO2, but people think there is. And if you train the computers to think there is, then they'll say, well, let's kill all the people, because then there's no more CO2. So, you be careful what you wish for, I guess, is an old admonition, but it applies heavily to AI. So just to kind of sum up a little bit, can it produce amazing results? Yes, and it already has, and there's no question about that. Can it produce disasters? Hijacking or destroying critical infrastructure, starting a war. Go back to 1964 in the movie Fail Safe, which was about starting a nuclear war because a computer sent the wrong code. Yes, that's possible too. And so what the board of OpenAI was doing was saying, just hey, we're not against it, we're in favor of it, but let's put on the brakes a little bit. And then they fired Altman just because he seemed a little, I'll say, devious, according to the press reports. But then the staff, and there were hundreds of engineers in a place like this, they all said, we all quit. We're going to quit. We're going to follow Sam to, Microsoft or whatever, wherever he goes. And then Silicon Valley got involved because they're the investors. the big investors, and they said, fire the board, bring Sam back, put down the rebellion, and let's keep going.
Mm.
What was that really about? What it was really about was money. Because I guarantee you, I've spent enough time in this world. Every one of those engineers is thinking IPO. I mean, seriously, they were getting ready to do
Yeah.
a $100 billion IPO. Now, I don't know what the stock option plan inside OpenAI was, probably just like all the rest. But every one of those couple hundred engineers is saying, hey, I got a chunk of that 100 billion, right? And you better believe this guy Kosha and some of the big Silicon Valley VCs that had backed it, yeah, they're going to get the 100-to-1 payoff. You know, they put up 10 million, they're looking at a billion. And so they fired the board members and then got new board members. Larry Summers, okay, you know, big brain, but what does he know about what we're talking about? And they bring back Sam, and they're rocking and rolling. But my point is that was pure greed. That was the greed of the staff and the greed of the Silicon Valley investors running down some legitimate concerns about where this is all going and the dangers to society, et cetera. So at least nobody was trying to make money off the atomic bomb, but they're sure trying to make money off of OpenAI. I'm not sure how confident I am in the whole OpenAI scene, given Altman's track record. But, you know, somebody will do it. They already are. Google and Facebook Microsoft on its own, independent of OpenAI, Facebook, they're all working on this. So good promise, yes. Good potential, yes. The 10,000 businesses that ran out and hired an AI guru in the last 60 days, and we're going to do AI. Okay, there are some efficiencies there. I think it's overhyped. I don't really have a view on Nvidia stock. They'll attract some competition.
Someone just wrote, they're retired. They used to work for government. They used to have a load of information sent to them every day. They don't get policy briefings anymore. Right. Where could they go for AI information?
Oh, it's a good question. There are probably a million outlets. The difficulty would be filtering them to finding the ones that are most valuable. So I just spent a little while criticizing the leadership of OpenAI, but OpenAI has a website. And they have published an enormous amount of material. So whatever you think of their future, Sam Altman and all that, I would go to OpenAI, just search it on Google, you'll find it. When you get there, they have pages, like literally hundreds of pages of research material and updates. Any major news service, Reuters, CNBC, The Economist, they all have not a million, but thousands of articles. If you're extremely patient, my new book will be out this summer. We're not quite ready to announce it formally, but I'm writing a book on AI as applied to finance, capital markets, and national security. Those are kind of my lanes. I always say books are worth buying anyway, but they're worth buying just for the sources. I mean, if you just go to the bibliography and the notes and the sources, you'll find, basically an encyclopedic level listing of really good articles and things you can read. But just go. I would say the publications that have had the best stuff. I don't agree with everything, but just in terms of information, The Economist has had a lot of stuff on this. The Wall Street Journal. So you don't have to go to like exotic places. Just go to the Wall Street Journal website, put in artificial intelligence, and I promise you 1,000 articles will pop up, and maybe just read them in reverse or skim them in reverse chronological order, and you'll find quite a bit. But OpenAI is a good source on this. Whatever their corporate problems, they've done a pretty good job on research. There are also some very good books on the subject. There's one called Human Compatible. Get a paperback, not that expensive, from Amazon. The author is, I believe, Stuart Russell, but I know the title is Human Compatible. There's a new book, fairly new, by Henry Kissinger, who of course just passed away. But the thing I like about Kissinger, he died at the age of 100, but he was still writing books when he was 99. But is co-authored by Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt. And if you don't know the name Eric Schmidt, he was the head of Google for a long time and still active in the field. So Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger, what's I forget the title, but just go to Amazon, put in those two authors, it'll pop up on I think the future of AI or something like that.
The age of AI. Yeah, just got it.
The age of AI, yeah. So I recommend those two books. They're both written by experts. They're both up to date. They cover kind of things we were talking about, and pros and cons. And just one last thing on the subject, Sean. The one of the problems with GPT, and if you're going to use it, you need to know this. I call it the puppy theory. And the puppy theory is when you're training a puppy, you throw a ball and who knows what the puppy does, but eventually they fetch it and bring it back to you. And when they do, you give them a little pat on the head and maybe a doggy treat. And that's how, it's just reinforcement learning, and that's how they learn to fetch the ball. GPT is not much different. When you give it an assignment and it goes out, it's going to find a lot of stuff. It's going to actually produce a pretty good essay or whatever he has to do. But if it has gaps or it can't quite make sense of the training materials or the search materials, it'll make things up. It'll just make things up because it doesn't want to disappoint you. It's like a puppy that wants a pat on the head. And one example that's been written up was a guy who asked GPT to write a biography about him. The computer didn't know that he was the one asking the question. He said, give me a biography of me, basically. And the computer came back and wrote a pretty good biography, 10 pages, whatever. And he's reading it and said he died in 2019. And of course, the guy's still alive, right? So he's like, oh, well, interesting. What did he die of? And then they came back, well, he died of this and that and all that. Well, it turns out that the guy asking the question and the guy asking the reporter was the obituary writer, who I believe was the Telegraph for the Guardian in the UK. I think it was the Telegraph. He was their obituary writer. So the computer's finding his name on 1,000 obituaries because he wrote all the obituaries. So well, the guy must be dead if he's done 1,000 obituaries. He must be dead. So it made that up. Now he obviously knew it was wrong, but it's kind of funny. If you're a subject matter expert and you ask for a question in your area of expertise, you're probably in the best position to spot the fake stuff or the stuff that's made up or just wrong, just wrong. But the non-subject matter expert isn't going to know that. They're going to say, college kids, I shouldn't blame college kids, workers, Wall Street researchers, whatever, give me a research report on this. And back comes a lot of stuff. And it looks really good. I mean, the form is good, but you're not going to know what's made up. And if you push that out to your clients, that could be a major disservice, even bordering on fraud. So it's kind of funny. The people who know the most and probably need GPT the least, because they actually are experts, are the only ones who can spot the fake stuff. And so how far does that get you? But I did a test where there were two writing samples, and one was written by GPT. And one was written by a grad student, pretty smart person. And they asked, tell me about the war in Ukraine or what's the status of the war in Ukraine or whatever. So GPT wrote a report and the grad student wrote a report. And they published them side by side anonymously. They didn't tell you which was which. And obviously the test was read them both and figure out which one's GPT. I read one sentence and said, this is GPT. Because no writer in the world would start a paragraph that way. Now, by the way, and I was right. But just to be clear, it was completely grammatical, spelled correctly, good English grammar, composition, it flowed, addressed the subject matter. There was nothing about it that screamed, illiterate or computer, except the first sentence was like just a cliche that made you cringe. And I said, maybe somebody would use that in the fifth paragraph, but nobody would start their essay with that like cliche. But the computer didn't know any better because the computer would have gone through a million samples of essays on geopolitical issues and would have encountered that phrase over and over. So in the computer algorithm, it's like, well, everyone who's ever written about this uses this phrase, or 90% of them have used this phrase. So I'll use it and I'll start with it. Then, of course, as a writer, that's a blunder because it's not creative and it kind of gives yourself away. So that was the
Mm.
first problem. But the second problem, and I think I was the only one to identify this, both the computer essay and the human essay were substantively completely wrong. They were like, because it was all because now this goes back to the training materials, right?
Mm.
Because everything coming out of the New York Times, Washington Post, the Financial Times, the Economist, Times of London, LA Times, name your paper, are all lies. They're basically all CIA, State Department propaganda about the status of the war in Ukraine. Remember in June, go back to June 4th, here comes the Ukrainian counteroffensive. They got Challenger tanks, Leopard tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, seven mechanized divisions. They're going to roll over the Russian Surovikin line and all the way to the Sea of Azov, cut off the supply chains to Crimea, retake Crimea. That's what they said. It was all
Yeah.
lies, all of it. None of it happened. The
Mhm.
Ukrainians lost 50% of their armor in like the first week on Russian minefields, drones, Russian aircraft attacks, etc. It was all burning on the battlefield. It was so bad that the UK defense minister called up Zelensky and said, please stop using our tanks because they're getting blown up. It's really bad for sales. And the U.S. Army wants their Abrams tanks back. They send us back the Abrams because we don't want those getting blown up too. The pictures are really bad for marketing. So that was a complete failure. And then the Russians didn't do much. They held their lines. They decimated the Ukrainians, casualties, sadly, in the hundreds of thousands of dead. But the Russians didn't do much. So the next narrative was it's a stalemate, not that the Ukrainians were going to go to the Sea of Azov, but it's a stalemate. It's not a stalemate. Not when the attrition rate is 7-1. You're 7 dead Ukrainians for every dead Russian. That's not a stalemate. That's an annihilation of the Ukrainians. And by the way, it's the Russian way of war. The Russians are very slow. They will crush you, but they take their time. And all you have to do is look at World War II, though, the Eastern Front. Um, the Wehrmacht goes in and they killed 5 million Russians. And like, hey, we're winning. No, Stalin just sent another 5 million to the front. And he had 5 million after that and 5 million after that. In other words, and at some point the Wehrmacht said, maybe we bit off more than we could chew here. And then, of course, the Germans were annihilated and the Russians went to Berlin. So that's the truth. But the essay, going back to what the computer generated, GPT, was like, the Ukrainians are winning. They've got advanced weapons, pardon me, Storm Shadow cruise missiles, wonder weapons, all this stuff. It was all wrong, but so was the human. The human was no better because, and the point, again, I don't want to do an editorial on the Ukrainian war. I'm making a point about how GPT actually works. The output is only as good as the training material. And if the
Right.
training material is full of lies, which it is, then you're going to get your output are going to be full of lies. And you can't blame the computer. The computer just did what it was told, did what it was trained to do at an advanced level. This is not nothing routine about this. But if you're a user, you better know more about it than the developers who build it, because the developers are just kind of following playbooks and engineering modules and things that they've done for years. And they turn it loose on training materials. But what you have to ask yourself, how good are the training materials? Because if it's a million pages of garbage, you're going to get very, very bad results. So I'll stop there. But again, I don't want to sell it short. It is powerful. It will change the world. It will cure diseases. It will solve engineering problems that have never been solved. All that is true. But side by side with that, you're going to have erroneous output, digesting lies and producing lies, what I call hallucinations, making things up. And then beyond that, does it start to take over critical infrastructure and turn out the lights because it thinks humans are bad? Because a lot of people run around saying humans are bad. That's all possible too. So I kind of lean to the, one step at a time. I do know, I've spoken to experts. I do know that the AI and GPT applications that there's some that already exist are being held back. They're not being released to the public because the inventors themselves recognize some of the dangers I'm talking about. And again, I thought this might be true, but I confirmed it with one of the top experts in the world. He said, there's more out there, but we're keeping it on the shelf because we don't think we have the governance, legal, and computer controls to be able to handle it. So the notion that it has this kind of Frankenstein type quality to it is not fear mongering. It's actually what the inventors themselves believe. So uh, let's hope they continue to exercise that kind of constraint. But it's a lot of promise and a lot of danger all at the same time. And for investors, I would say you really need to be selective and just don't jump on the hype just because someone's using AI, because there's a lot there could be a lot less there than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the questions that we got, Jim, was as we get on, pretty much every session, is do you have any stocks that you'd recommend that you think are going to fly right now that are a bit underpriced? And I mean, there's a few in the AI sector, but really, as you mentioned, the Nvidias, the Microsofts, the people that are really into it, they've already shot up. We've got to miss
Correct.
that race. Mhm.
Right. And yes, pardon me, that's right. But they could be in for a pretty sharp correction. I'm not saying they're not good companies or good
Mhm.
inventions. They are. But if the stock gets overhyped and people start to realize that a lot of it is hype, and then we go into a recession, that's the subject for another day, but we're either in one or soon to be in a very severe one, and the stock market corrects, the stocks that were most overhyped are going to fall the most. So not only is the party over in terms of the stocks you just mentioned, but you could be setting yourself up for major losses at this stage. If you want to, if you want to like put options on some of them, long dated put options, that's one thing. But if you're looking for big winners, you got to look in the smaller, newer companies that are doing something unique or different in the field. Don't just buy the AI sticker. Look for somebody doing something that's really different that could have a very positive impact.
You mentioned this already, but I was talking about this when you popped off for a second. It cracked me up because when I was writing an article against the sanctions of Russia, I'm like, oh, what were those things that Russia has that the rest of the world needs? And I knew it was like vanadium and chromium and all this other, really fantastic stuff. And as Chat GPT kind of, because I just said, can you just list them for me and give me
Yep.
the stuff? And I'm like, that's all wrong. Like the whole list was incorrect. And I went back to the US
Right.
Geological Survey and I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad I knew this. And apparently, I don't know if you had heard this, there was a lawyer that got disbarred because he asked ChatGTP to put a brief together,
Brief. Right.
and they made up the
They
cases.
cited a case that never exists, and the judge was smart enough, like, well, I can't find this in my on Lexus or whatever. Yeah, and he was on this part. He was definitely reprimanded. Yeah, that's malpractice.
Yeah, completely. So it's absolutely fascinating how at one kind of angle you're like, oh God, please don't blow up the planet, and on the other side you're like, can you at least get some few facts straight? It's an
Exactly. Yeah,
amazing dichotomy, amazing dichotomy
that's
there.
the problem. Yep. Yep.
Do you have any? I mean, we've got 5 minutes left. Is there anything, Jim, that you'd like to add in closing for everybody before we sign off?
Um, we had, I think, pretty good discussion about AI, and I am working on a book on it. The um, I guess one thing I would point to is there have been some reports, and they're valid. I don't really question them, but there are a number of hedge funds that are using AI to pick stocks. And you're like, well, that sounds pretty cool. AI
Hmm.
can look at more research reports and read more pages and do more processing than I can, any human can. So isn't that a good idea? And some of these hedge funds have had pretty good results, and they've been able to show that their AI stock picks are outperforming some index, S&P 500, whatever it may be. So that's true as far as it goes. So you say to yourself, well, gee, can I do that? Or answer maybe yes. Or can I invest in a hedge fund or some mutual fund or something that's doing the same thing? And the answer is maybe yes. But here's the problem. Um, there's a long history of good ideas that make money, that hit Wall Street. Guess what happens within months? Everybody copies it. Everybody's like, hey, it's working for you. I'll get it too. And then you get into a feedback loop where now because the algorithms are all about the same. It's not as if everyone's got a unique, penetrating, different algorithm. They're all kind of the same. and they're getting the same inputs, from, SEC reports and news headlines and government data. And, they don't sound like you get different news than everybody else. We all get the same news at the same time. So, so now as these things spread, and more hedge funds, more mutual funds and ETFs and other investment instruments using the same algorithms, getting the same inputs, producing the same recommendations, guess what happens? They go up because everyone's buying them. And people say, well, let's buy some more. And it goes up some more. And you get into this feedback loop. And pretty quickly, you're in bubble territory. Then the whole thing crashes and everyone loses all their money. So there's a name for this. Economists use the phrase fallacy of composition. And what it means is that something that may work very well for an individual or a small group becomes completely dysfunctional when adopted on a large scale. And the classic example is savings. So is it a good idea to save money? Absolutely. Save money, invest it wisely, kids' education, down payment on a house, your own retirement, medical needs, whatever. Saving money is a really good thing. Should I save more? Yeah, probably a good idea for most of us. But what happens if the whole economy just starts saving and nobody spends? Well, the economy collapses because we're driven 70% by consumption. So there's an example of a habit that's really smart for a small group, but becomes dysfunctional at a large scale. And that's the fallacy of composition. The same thing is true with AI stock picking. Right now, it can work very well for a small group. I don't dispute that. But as it becomes more and more widespread, more and more adopted, not in unique ways, but in copycat ways, you're going to get into bubble territory very quickly. So I'd keep an eye out for that.
And there you have it, folks. A lot to think about and watch out for in this space, both good and bad. And we'll be following this technology very closely as it develops. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. If you want more content like this, do drop a like and hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next time. I'm Sean Ring for Paradigm Press. See you next time.